All right, today we're cracking open the history books to pull out the ultimate playbook for building an empire in medieval India. We're talking about that wild period between the 7th and 12th centuries, a time just full of ambition, crazy alliances, and powerful new dynasties popping up.
So how do you actually do it? How do you go from being some local chief to a king, an emperor, or even, the lord of the three worlds? That's the big question we're tackling today. Just think of this as your personal, historical how-to guide for building an empire. Okay, let's dive right in. The very first chapter in our playbook is all about that climb to the top. And you know what's interesting? It doesn't start with a crown. Nope, it starts with a position of service.
So I want you to meet the Samanta. Back in the 7th century, these guys were powerful warrior chiefs or big-shot landlords who served under an existing king. They were supposed to bring gifts, show up at court, and provide military muscle whenever it was needed. You can kind of think of them as the ambitious vice presidents of their time, loyal, for now anyway.
So what's the game plan to go from VP to CEO? Well, this slide pretty much lays it out. First, as a Samanta, you start gaining power and, more importantly, wealth. Then you give yourself a little promotion, declaring yourself Mahasamanta, or Great Lord. And the final, biggest step? You overthrow your boss, the king. A perfect example of this is a Rashtrakuta chief named Danti Durga, who followed this playbook to a T. But he had one last, super clever step to make sure everyone was cool with his new rule.
Now, this is where it gets really smart. That final piece of the puzzle was all about legitimacy. After he took the throne, Danti Durga performed a ritual called Hiranyagarbha, which literally means the golden womb. This brilliant ceremony was thought to give him a symbolic rebirth as a kshatriya, the traditional warrior caste, which gave him the social street cred he needed to rule, even if he wasn't born into it. Pretty clever, right?
Okay, so you've got the crown. Congratulations. But the game is so not over. Now you have to actually rule. So let's flip to the next section of the playbook and see how you hold on to that power. First things first, you need a serious title upgrade. You can't be a great king with some old subordinate-sounding title, so you adopt something way grander, like Maharaja Adiraja, Great King, Overlord of Kings, or my personal favorite, Tribhuvana Chakravartin, which means Lord of the Three Worlds. It's all about projecting power. But here's the catch. Despite these huge titles, they often still had to share power with groups of peasants and traders.
Next, you need some amazing PR to go along with that fancy new title. And that's where prashastas come in. These were these glowing compositions, usually written by learned brahmanas, that spelled out all of a ruler's heroic achievements. Think of it like the medieval version of a perfectly curated social media profile, making sure a former Samanta was now seen as this valiant, victorious warrior, even if the details were, let's say, a little exaggerated.
But all this grandeur doesn't come cheap. To run an empire, you need resources, cold, hard cash. And to get those, you need this. Over 400. What on earth could this number possibly represent in a medieval kingdom? Any ideas?
If you guessed taxes, you absolutely hit the nail on the head. Inscriptions from the Chola dynasty down in southern India mention over 400 different terms for taxes. And oh man, they got incredibly creative. There was Vedi, which wasn't paid in cash but in forced labor. You had Kadamai, your basic land tax. But then they also taxed almost everything you could imagine, putting a new thatch roof on your house, using a ladder to climb a palm tree, even inheriting your family's property. The bottom line was, everything was a potential source of revenue.
Of course, you weren't the only ambitious ruler out there with this playbook. Resources weren't just collected peacefully, they were fought over. And this leads us to the most high-stakes part of the whole game, warfare. And this just shows you how intense that competition was. For centuries, three major dynasties, the Gurjara Partiharas, the Rashtrakutas, and the Palas, were locked in what historians call the tripartite struggle. And the grand prize they were all fighting tooth and nail for? The incredibly valuable and symbolic city of Kannauj in the Ganga Valley. So, when you're waging war for wealth, you go where the money is. And in medieval India, temples were often unbelievably wealthy. So, a really common military strategy was to target and raid them. Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni, for example, was famous for targeting rich temples like Somnath in Gujarat during his campaigns into the subcontinent.
So with all this competition, all this fighting, how did one dynasty manage to not just survive, but totally dominate for centuries? Well, they didn't just use the playbook, they perfected every single page. Let's talk about the Cholas.
The Cholas started exactly where our playbook says to, as a minor chiefly family serving as Samantas to the Pallava kings.
But then, in the middle of the 9th century, a leader named Vijayalaya captured the super fertile Kaveri River Delta, built the town of Tanjavur, and laid the foundation for one of the greatest empires the region had ever seen.
And what an empire it became. Under these really powerful successors like Rajaraja I, who came to the throne in 985, and his son Rajendra I, the Chola kingdom just exploded in size and influence. I mean, they didn't just conquer their neighbors, they pushed all the way north to the Ganga Valley and even developed a powerful navy to launch expeditions into Southeast Asia. This was empire building on a whole other level.
The Cholas absolutely perfected the art of using temples as centers of power. The magnificent temples at Thanjavur and Gangaikonda Cholapuram weren't just for praying. They were the nuclei of entire settlements, supporting huge communities of priests, garland makers, cooks, musicians, and dancers. They were the absolute beating heart of the Chola economy and culture.
And connected to these incredible temples was some of the most beautiful art of the entire era. The bronze sculptures that were created during the Chola period are still considered among the finest in the entire world. Just a testament to their incredible skill in cultural achievement.
But look, none of this cultural and military power would have been possible without a rock-solid economic foundation. The Cholas were absolute masters of engineering. In the fertile but flood-prone Kaveri Delta, they built embankments to stop flooding, dug canals to get water to the fields, and built these massive tanks to collect rainwater. This incredibly sophisticated irrigation system was the engine that fueled their entire empire.
They also had a highly organized system of local administration. Get this. Inscriptions from a place called Uttarameru tell us exactly who could be a member of a Sabha, their local assembly. And the qualifications were unbelievably strict. You had to own land and pay taxes on it. You had to own your own home. You had to be between 35 and 70, have deep knowledge of the Vedas, be good at administration, and, most importantly, be honest. This was serious business, not a job for just anyone.
So there you have it, the medieval Indian playbook for building an empire, from the ground up. You start as a subordinate Samanta, you gain power, and then you legitimize your rule with big titles, glowing PR, and sacred rituals. You fund the whole thing with a massive system of taxes, and you defend and expand it with a powerful army, using temples as the center of everything. Which kind of leaves us with one final thought. When you look at the tools of power today, influence, resources, public image, how different, really, is the playbook?